You just landed in Dubai. You look up. Your neck hurts before your brain even processes what you're seeing. A spike of glass and steel disappears into the clouds above you. And your first thought is simple. You think, I want that. You think, imagine owning that. But the real answer is far stranger than the fantasy in your head. Because owning the tallest building on Earth is not a dream. It is a financial machine with rules most people never learn. Rules about debt, rules about air, rules about a number that isn't even attached to the ground. Today, you're going to understand exactly what it costs to own something like the Burj Khalifa. Not the myth, the math. Let's start with the number everyone already knows. Roughly $1.5 billion. That's what it took to build it? But here's what almost nobody asks. Where did that money actually come from? And who was actually paying it back? The developer was a company called Emaar Properties. Not a government treasury, not a sovereign wealth fund writing a blank check for prestige. A publicly traded real estate company with shareholders, with debt covenants, with quarterly earnings calls where analysts ask uncomfortable questions.
This distinction matters more than you think. A government can build a monument and never expect it to pay for itself. A company cannot. A company has to make the number work, or the number eventually makes the company disappear. So how do you make a $1.5 billion spike of concrete pay for itself? You don't sell the building. You sell what's inside it, piece by piece, years before it's even finished. This is called pre-selling, and it's the actual engine behind almost every super tall skyscraper on the planet. Emaar sold apartments in what it branded downtown Dubai before a single floor existed. Buyers paid deposits based on architectural renderings. Your brain sees a finished tower. The developer's spreadsheet sees a construction loan being paid down in real time by people who haven't even seen their unit yet. Think about what that actually means. You are not funding a building. You are funding a 5-year bet that thousands of strangers will believe in a rendering enough to hand over real money before the concrete exists. Isn't that strange? An entire tower rising because of collective belief in a picture. Now, stretch that idea further, because construction financing on this scale is layered, not simple. Pre-sale deposits covered a portion of the cash flow, but the rest came from a mix of bank loans, project financing, and equity from Emaar's own balance sheet. Every layer had a different appetite for risk. The banks wanted collateral and completion guarantees. The equity holders wanted upside if the project became the global icon everyone hoped it would be.
And sitting underneath all of it was a construction timeline that, if it slipped even a year, could quietly turn a profitable tower into a very expensive hole in the desert. Height, in that sense, isn't just an engineering decision. It's a bet placed with other people's money on a 5-year clock that never stops ticking. Now here's the part that separates a building from an asset. Height alone doesn't make money. Height is a cost. Every additional floor near the top of a super tall tower is dramatically more expensive per square foot than a floor near the bottom. You need reinforced cores. You need elevator systems that can survive extreme wind sway. You need mechanical floors, sometimes called refuge floors or vanity floors, that exist purely to hold the building up, not to hold tenants. Economist Jason Barr, who has spent years studying the financial logic of skyscrapers, points to something counterintuitive. Beyond a certain height, buildings stop being primarily about usable space and start being about status. The extra 100 meters at the top of the Burj Khalifa isn't office space. It's a spire, a crown, a number on a plaque. And that number, ironically, is the actual product being sold. This is where the twist begins.
You'd assume the tallest building makes the most money per square foot simply by existing. That's not how it works. In fact, the very top of most super tall towers is often financially the least efficient real estate in the entire structure. You are burning enormous construction cost for shrinking usable floor area, all so a building can claim a title. So why do it? Why would a rational company chase a title that actively loses money on paper? Because the title itself becomes the marketing budget. Once a tower is globally known as the tallest building on Earth, every hotel room, every retail unit, every office lease inside it inherits that fame for free. You don't have to advertise luxury anymore. The Skyline does it for you. Researchers studying what's sometimes called the skyscraper premium have found that height records generate media coverage worth many multiples of what traditional advertising would cost for the same exposure. A single record-breaking press cycle can put a building's silhouette on the front page of outlets around the world for free, in a way no billboard campaign could ever replicate. Andrew Lawrence, the economist behind the Skyscraper Index, took this even further. Working with researchers at Barclays Capital, he tracked a century of data connecting record-breaking skyscraper announcements to economic cycles, and he noticed something unsettling. The world's tallest buildings tend to get announced right before major economic downturns. Not because tall buildings cause recessions, but because record-chasing height is often a symptom of cheap credit and overconfidence, right before both dry up. Let that sit for a second. The tower you're staring at might be, statistically, a warning sign disguised as a monument. Doesn't that change how you look at it? The building was originally going to be called something else entirely, tied to the name of the developing emirate itself. But right as the tower neared completion, Dubai's own property market cracked hard. Credit tightened across the region, and the emirate needed support to steady its finances.
That support arrived from its neighbor, Abu Dhabi, and shortly afterward, on the very day of the tower's opening, its name changed to honor the ruler who helped stabilize the debt. Think about that sequence for a second. The tallest building on Earth didn't just get finished during a financial crisis. Its final name was decided by one. It's worth pausing here to ask a harder question. If the top floors are financially inefficient, and the title itself is a gamble that tends to arrive right before downturns, why does every fast-growing city on Earth still seem to want one? Look at Shanghai. Look at Kuala Lumpur before it. Look at the current race unfolding in Jeddah, where a tower has been under construction on and off for over a decade, chasing the exact same crown Dubai already claimed. Each city seems to believe its tower will be different. Each city so far has run into the same wall of cost overruns, delayed timelines, and financing that gets harder to justify the higher the structure climbs. There's a pattern researchers have noticed across these projects. The tallest building in a country is rarely commissioned purely by market demand. It's usually commissioned as a message to investors that the city is arriving, a message to tourists that this skyline deserves a stop on their itinerary, a message sometimes to a country's own citizens that ambition here has no ceiling. The building becomes a form of national advertising, paid for in concrete instead of airtime.
And like any advertising budget, its return on investment is almost impossible to measure cleanly, because you can't isolate exactly how many hotel bookings, how many investment decisions, how many tourism dollars exist purely because a silhouette exists on a skyline somewhere. Now, let's talk about who actually owns pieces of the Burj Khalifa today, because owning this building is nothing like owning a house. Emaar retained ownership of large sections, especially the commercial floors, the Armani Hotel, and the observation decks. But hundreds of individual apartment units are privately owned, purchased outright by wealthy buyers from around the world, many of whom have never spent a single night inside. For them, the unit isn't a home, it's a store of value in a form that happens to be shaped like a room. This matters because of something urban economists have flagged for years. In cities with intense foreign capital inflow, luxury apartments in trophy towers often function less like housing and more like a vertical vault. Real estate researcher Kate Asher, who studies the infrastructure of tall buildings, has pointed out that iconic towers increasingly serve a dual identity. They're marketed as places to live, But they're purchased in large part as places to park money that needs to sit somewhere stable, somewhere prestigious, somewhere that won't lose its stored value even if the market dips. Harvard economist Edward Glaser, who has written extensively on the economics of cities and height restrictions, frames this in a broader way. Skylines, he argues, are shaped less by how much space a city actually needs, and more by what a city is legally allowed to build, and what buyers are emotionally willing to pay for. Height limits, zoning rules, and land scarcity all combine to turn certain addresses into scarce trophies. And scarcity, more than steel or glass, is what actually sets the final price. So who profits, day to day, from the actual operation of the building? Not primarily from apartment sales anymore. That money was mostly captured years ago, during construction, when units first sold off blueprints. The ongoing revenue engine is something quieter: service charges, hotel operations. The at-the-top observation deck, which alone sells millions of tickets at prices far beyond what the physical experience would cost to produce. You are not just paying for an elevator ride, you are paying a toll to touch the number. The height itself has become the product being sold over and over to a new visitor every few minutes, forever. Think about the sheer efficiency of that model. A hotel room can only be sold once per night. A retail unit can only be leased once per tenant. But an observation deck ticket can be sold to a completely new customer every single hour of every single day, at a margin that dwarfs almost anything else in the building. The most profitable square footage in the entire tower might not be the penthouse. It might be the metal railing on floor 124, where a tourist stands for 4 minutes to take a photograph before making room for the next one in line. And the pricing itself follows a very deliberate structure. Buy your ticket weeks in advance, and it costs relatively little. Show up at the door wanting to go up right now, and the price can climb several times higher. That's not an accident, and it's not simple greed either. It's a textbook example of what economists call yield management, the same pricing logic airlines use to fill seats and hotels use to fill rooms. The observation deck has a hard capacity limit set by elevator throughput and safety regulations. So the operator isn't just selling a view, it's selling access to a scarce time slot. And scarcity, once again, is what sets the price, not the concrete underneath your feet. Here's the counterintuitive twist economists find most interesting. In pure real estate terms, per square foot of usable space, the tallest floors of most super tall towers are almost never the most efficient to build relative to what they generate in rent. And yet buyers pay staggering premiums specifically for those top floors. Why? Because you're not really buying square footage at that point. You're buying rank. You're buying the psychological certainty that no one, at least for now, can look down on you. Behavioral economists have a name for this kind of spending: positional consumption. You're not purchasing a functional benefit. You're purchasing your position relative to everyone else. A 4-bedroom apartment on floor 12 and a 4-bedroom apartment on floor 112 might have nearly identical layouts, but one of them sells for multiples more, purely because of where it sits in the sky. The concrete costs roughly the same. The air above it does not. Real estate researchers who track high-rise pricing curves have documented this pattern across dozens of super tall cities, not just Dubai. The premium per floor doesn't rise in a straight line as you go up. It rises slowly for the first third of a tower, accelerates through the middle, and then, near the very top, jumps sharply, far beyond what the improved view alone could reasonably explain. That jump is the price tag on status itself, separated cleanly from the price tag on the concrete, the glass, and the wiring. If you ever wanted a single number that captures how much people are willing to pay just to rank higher than their neighbors, that jump in the pricing curve is about as close as economics gets to measuring it directly. This is the real economics behind owning something like the Burj Khalifa. You're not paying for shelter. You're paying for a number that changes how other people perceive you the moment you say the address out loud. Now, here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Super tall towers, almost without exception, are financially fragile in ways their glass exteriors never reveal. Maintenance costs scale in a brutal, non-linear way as height increases. Window washing systems for a building this tall require custom robotics, engineered specifically for this one structure, because no off-the-shelf system was ever designed to reach that high. Elevator technology has to counteract wind sway that can move the very top of the tower by more than a meter in strong gusts. Structural engineers have had to design for the building to bend intentionally, because a perfectly rigid tower this tall would eventually crack under its own thermal expansion and wind load. The building survives specifically because it's built to sway, not to resist. Isn't that the opposite of what you'd expect from the tallest, strongest-looking structure on the planet?
The tower doesn't win by being unbendable. It wins by being flexible enough to bend without breaking. And the costs don't stop at the structure itself. Cooling a building this tall, in a desert climate this extreme, requires one of the largest district cooling plants ever built for a single property. Water has to be pumped to elevations that would be unthinkable in almost any other city on Earth, requiring booster pump systems on multiple levels just to maintain basic pressure. None of this shows up in the postcard. All of it shows up in the operating budget, every single month for as long as the tower stands. Consider the elevators alone. A building this tall can't rely on a single shaft running from the ground to the top. The physics of cable weight makes that impossible past a certain height. Instead, the tower uses a system of sky lobbies, transfer floors where you switch from one elevator bank to another, the same way you might switch trains at a busy subway interchange. Every one of those transfer systems adds mechanical complexity, adds maintenance contracts, adds specialized technicians who need to be trained specifically for this building. Because very few other buildings on the planet share its exact engineering. You're not just paying to own height. You're paying to maintain a piece of infrastructure that behaves less like a typical apartment block and more like a small vertical city, complete with its own logistics problems that don't exist anywhere near sea level. Which brings us to the modern mirror, the part of this story that connects back to something in your own life. Because you do this too, on a much smaller scale, every single day. You spend money, sometimes irrationally, on the version of something that ranks higher, even when the functional difference is nearly invisible. The phone with slightly more storage you'll never use. The seat a few rows closer that gets you off the plane 90 seconds earlier. The apartment on the higher floor, in a much smaller building than this one, purely because the number on the door makes you feel like you've climbed somewhere. You are, in miniature, running the exact same financial logic that built the tallest tower on Earth. Buying rank, buying position, paying extra not for function, but for where you sit relative to everyone else. You probably don't think of it that way in the moment. Nobody stands at a checkout counter thinking about positional consumption theory, but the impulse is the same one that filled a tower in the desert with buyers who'd never spend a night in it. A small, quiet calculation running in the background of nearly every purchase you make, weighing not just what something does for you, but what it says about you to everyone who sees it. And just like the Burj Khalifa, your own version of that decision only holds up if you're flexible enough to bend when pressure hits, instead of staying rigid and cracking. The tower that dominates every skyline photo on the planet isn't standing because it refused to move. It's standing because engineers accepted from day one that swaying was the price of staying upright. So the next time you look up at something enormous and think, I want to own that, remember what you're actually pricing. You're not pricing steel or glass or even land. You're pricing a story that other people agree to believe in, funded years in advance by buyers who trusted a rendering, sustained by tourists paying to stand near a number, and held together by a structure smart enough to bend rather than break. You didn't just land in Dubai and look up at a building. You looked up at the most literal financial instrument you'll ever stand beneath. And the real answer, it turns out, was never about height at all.